We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our members and guests. My name is Stephen Longmire, and I am this year's president of the DIA. Due to the global pandemic, we've opted to continue to hold our meetings as webinars at this point. The two key mandates of the Digital Imaging Association are to provide education and networking opportunities for our members. At this time, we will have to forgo the in-person networking for everyone's safety, but we hope that you find the educational aspect worthwhile, and we appreciate your feedback. Our membership is comprised of pre-press, printers, packaging converters, designers, advertisers, print buyers, equipment and consumable manufacturers, as well as vendors. If you're with us as a guest today, please consider joining the Digital Imaging Association. Today's session is an example of the high caliber meetings that we run. If you'd like more information on membership, please contact either myself or Marg McLeod at 416-254-4941 or at marg, at digitalimagingassociation.com. Like most trade associations today, financial stability does not come from the membership revenues alone. And so we turn to the vendors and suppliers to support our goals as an association. We're honored to continue to receive the support and recognition of the DIA's contribution to the growth and development of the graphic imaging sciences industry from the following companies. Our platinum sponsors are Canon, EFI, HP, Konica Minolta, and Spicers. Our gold sponsors are Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, and Heidelberg. We ask you to please consider these companies and their demonstrated support of the industry when making your future purchasing decisions. The technology for the webinar today was graciously provided by HP. The topic for today's webinar is wide format a growth opportunity for your business? Today in the wide format print environment, we see applications such as custom textiles, vehicle wrapping, wallpaper, interior decorations, circuit boards, flooring, prototyping, and custom packaging, as well as backlit displays, banners, and even dimensional print. These technological advances create opportunities to expand your print business beyond your existing client base. In doing so, we've actually created two webinars to examine the opportunities and challenges in the wide format markets. And today's will address the industrial market applications. Our second webinar on May the 19th will address commercial market applications. In terms of industrial wide format, it's a huge volume application based on inkjet technology. The market is widespread and used when printing steps are integrated in the manufacturing process and contribute to the manufacture of the end product, i.e. fiberboard decorations that mimic wood textures to produce furniture that looks like real wood, but is really inkjet media laminated onto the fiberboard. Gravure, flexography, and screen printing had been previous technologies that were used for these commercial products, but digital inkjet is starting to replace them. The monitor for today is myself, Stephen Longmire, National Sales Manager at Sydney Stone. My roles at Sydney Stone include researching new product lines and manufacturers for distribution, setting pricing structures, and managing the partner program, as well as conceiving and implementing marketing initiatives to support our sales efforts. Prior to joining Sydney Stone, I was the associate publisher of Print Action for over 13 years. I was responsible for all sales, special projects, organizing and hosting the Canadian Printing Awards, as well as Print Forum. We've actually been supporting the Canadian Print Scholarship Fund for many years, and I'm also been serving on the DIA board for 5 years, including the last 2 as president. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Jason Hamilton, who is the Director of Digital Print Strategies and Sales Operations for North America, Offset and Inkjet Solutions at AGFA. Jason's career spans close to 30 years in the print industry. He started it as a film stripper, and Jason is the consummate print junkie and has embraced all things digital. He's worked on the printer side of the business for companies such as Batten Graphics, The Advocate, TI Group, and Hughes Packaging, as well as on the vendor side from Spicers/Paperlinks and AGFA. Jason's vast collection of running shoes resides in the Toronto area. Next, I'd like to introduce Thomas Ngilio, who North American Latex Business Lead for HP's Large Format Production Business Group. Tom Gilio is currently the North American Latex Business Lead for HP's Large Format Production accounts and transitioned to his new role managing the roll-to-roll and flatbed HP latex printers in 2020. His career in the printing industry spans 30 plus years in digital printing, thermoforming, screen printing, and distortion printing. Thomas resides in the Chicagoland area, my apologies. Next, we have Peter Spring. He was the president of the TI Group. Peter leads a customer-focused culture that helps clients, primarily brand owners, organize and execute graphic communication solutions. His career began with Kodak in sales as an account manager in Toronto, Vancouver, and London, Ontario. He also ran his own large format printing business in London for 10 years before moving back to Toronto in 1989. At TI Group, Peter has held various roles within the organization, including leading the sales team, managing operations and special projects, including new technology production, and systems that integrate activities across the organization. Now, we're going to have a panel discussion beginning shortly, but if any of our attendees and guests have any questions they'd like to pose to the panelists, please submit them via the chat window through Zoom. If you would like them answered by a specific panelist, please put the panelist's name within the question. If the question is unspecified to a panelist, I will open it up to all panelists to answer. At this point, I'd like to begin the panel discussion. We'll start with Jason. Jason, can we hear? Oh, yeah. So we have some of the questions that we have already, which would be, which market segment is experiencing the fastest migration of traditional, in quotes, industrial printing to convert to industrial inkjet? Which market segments would be the most robust? And I'll open up to the panelists as a whole.
For me, I would say, the directional change, which is a lot of it was driven by COVID. So unfortunately, a negative created a positive, was definitely the swing in the corrugated market and what I would call the short run packaging space. So a lot of conversion to people using digital presses for corrugated displays such as sidekicks and pallet wraps and end caps. But I also think as we expand beyond that and even into areas that are not part of the traditional print process for many of us, to your point, flooring and industrial decor has definitely jumped into that digital space. So we see a lot of flooring companies that traditionally use a lot of gravure or flexo or even screen applications, definitely jumping into that inkjet form. And we can see not just within ourselves at AGFA, but even some of my counterparts at EFI and Durst and others, playing in that space as well too, driving those industrial changes.
Thomas, I'd like to ask for your input. Thomas, sorry, I'd like to ask your input on the same question. Which market segment is experiencing the fastest migration, and your opinion to traditional industrial printing to inkjet?
Yeah, I'd pretty much have to concur with some of the things that that Jason had said. We see large strides in the packaging industry just because we're shipping more things than we've ever shipped before. So, companies that need to, a rapid go-to-market where they develop their products and then their packages has really lent itself to digital. That's been, that's been wildly popular. The other thing is some of that industrial decor, specifically printing to plastics. Printing to, there's probably more plastic going into places now than there ever has been, with all the demarcation and all the partitions and things. But a lot of those are getting printed, and I think that has prompted many buyers to look at, printing on plastics, forming plastics. Of the such, so that you can make parts for automobiles, aftermarket, POP, lends itself to a lot of different things. So so don't see anything but upside for that, going forward.
Perfect. And Peter, in terms of the brand owners that you deal with, what are you seeing from the print production side?
Yeah, pardon me. I think we've all gotten used to printing things like wallpaper and adhesive vinyl for semi-permanent and permanent use, sometimes for temporary use, sometimes for long-term wallpaper. But I think the segments that are moving the quickest, and Jay mentioned this, the pandemic has brought on very unique opportunities with respect to printing to corrugate. And I think where the large format community is particularly well positioned is traditionally that business is very long run, and it's often litho labels laminated onto a corrugate. And they're not printers. Those guys are converters, and we're printers. But the investment required to participate in that market, I mean, it's a pretty different animal, and it's and it's a long game. So I think the opportunity really is to use existing equipment to do the short run, the print on demand, which is a growing requirement as people, as brand owners, try to adjust their business model from typical produce product, ship it to a warehouse, put it out to a retailer, and they're adjusting that to their own direct to consumer models, not necessarily even through Amazon. We're seeing that with brand owners. So there's a lot of changes. The other one that we do see typically in the past, that a lot of the permanent displays, which were very permanent displays that were made out of metal, the cost is so high and the life is so long, but the market is changing so quickly that a lot of those budgets are being redirected to, let's say semi-permanent displays, something that might last 6 months or a year, and it doesn't need that level of structure or long-term performance. But again, the requirements to get into that market, you need to be able to do a little bit of structural design, understand the way the materials act, and then also be able to put ink on that material, whether it be a thin metal or acrylic or other materials that you'd be able to bend and form. That's another big opportunity.
Perfect. This question may be more suited to Thomas and Jason just because of the large cross international scope of it, but I'd like your opinion as well, Peter. Are certain geographic markets quicker to adopt this technology than others? And if so, why do you think that is? I'll open it up. I won't do a formal in order. Anyone can jump in at any point in time now.
Well, as I'm sitting in one of the largest states in the U.S., being Texas today, I will tell you, it's traveling between both sides of the border, you can see where acceptance is accelerated in certain areas faster than others. I will say, as an example, in terms of the flooring space and the conversion to that digital infrastructure, it's much bigger and much more accepted to change probably in the U.S. right now that we're seeing, and really I think it's just because they have bigger wings to spread than we do, right? It's the Canadian market, as we've always agreed, has had a strategic advantage, as we always felt, and we do print better than other regions of the world. When our region of the world is just a little bit smaller than everyone else's, we tend not to take as many risks, and we watch other people take the risk first. So I will say that in that flooring, and to Thomas's point, that industrial decor side of the business, whether it's been a UV application, a latex, or even as water-based, has really started to accelerate outside of latex. I would say that the adoption rate, dependent on your location, has been quite quick, quite fast. And we're definitely seeing it in the flooring sector, especially south of the border.
Perfect. Peter or Thomas, any
Yeah, no, I believe there are pockets too. I think one of the things the pandemic has given people is an opportunity to maybe pause a little bit and to recalibrate themselves, recalibrate their business models, so they can look at new in innovative markets. So I mean, what happens is, owners need to decide how to service their existing customers with new solutions, right? But then they also need to find new customers and grasp onto these new applications and these industrial applications that we've talked about. So really, it's given a lot of people pause to do that. I don't think I've ever been, south of the border doesn't, for us, I mean, there's pockets all over. There's industrial pockets, but we're finding that there is a niche of companies that are looking to go beyond servicing the customers they have. So finding new applications is real important to them.
Peter, I'm not sure if you deal with customers on both sides of the border or even internationally, but do you see certain geographic areas or even within Canada that have been quicker to move into certain applications?
Yeah, I'll just make 3 quick points. I think one of the things where we see more adoption in the US is access to capital and within ownership's risk tolerance. It's a different set of levers in the US, and a little bit more of the Wild West per se compared to Canada. And I think but the primary factor is, do you have a customer? And if you don't have a customer, you really got nothing to do. And I think there is a wider variety of customers, and certainly when you're looking at some of the capital costs to enter some of these markets, you might not be talking 3, 4, or 500,000. You might be talking 2 or 3 million. You need a lot of volume to be able to get a return on that investment. So when you look at high volume industrial manufacturing, that market is just so much bigger, and it's just tougher to find those needles in a haystack in the Canadian marketplace.
But to add to that, sorry, Peter, is also look at some of the commercial printers over the past year and a half who actually didn't print commercial product, but they printed industrial product for safety during COVID.
It's true.
So even within that themselves, they changed the dynamic of their business. And I'm sure, not everyone's going to raise their hand, but being able to adapt to that definition of an industrial printer for an application outside of what we would traditionally do is acceptance and change. And I think there's a lot of printers today that are thanking their lucky stars that they had the people and the wherewithal to jump to that side, and in some cases survive. And I don't care where you are in the world, from Europe to Canada to Australia, it doesn't matter. They all went through that phase. So I think in many cases, everyone became an industrial printer without actually having the classification of an industrial printer.
That's a very good point, actually, in repurposing their existing equipment in some cases that was used more for the commercial market, moving it into more of an industrial application. That's actually a great segue into another question here is, do you see divisional graphics and or like protective plexiglass shielding? I could even go into, physical spacing, signage and things like that. Do you see this as being a sustainable market moving forward, post-pandemic, so to speak? Do you see the printers staying in these markets, or do you see them kind of pivoting back to more, POP, commercial, stuff like that?
Well,
Are we going to travel the same circle and go Jason, Thomas, Peter? Or
you can jump in, whoever goes first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Thomas. You're going to start.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. We've really looked at this, and we've talked to a lot of our customers, and we've listened to really what they had planned on doing. Here in the US, if you take a look at retail and you take a look at office and you take a look at even restaurants, there's about 8 million square feet of office space or retail space. There's about 4 million of office space. There's probably 1 million restaurants that we know of. And all of these mediums are going to have to change going forward. We were just talking about that before the call started, right? Where offices aren't going to be the same. The idea of having cubicles and divisions and partitions in different settings is going to be more prevalent. The same thing when we go out socially is going to be a little bit different. So we see the AEC community, architectural, engineering, and construction industry, those companies that have pivoted. I know that's an often overused term these days, but those companies that have pivoted have really positioned themselves well to handle all these divisional graphics. That was actually the first time I've heard the word divisional graphics, but it does make a lot of sense. And I think those companies have done a pretty good job, and they probably will, come up with newer applications going forward.
So I'll go next. I think for a lot of organization, you got to pick your lanes. And, if you've been in the business of going after in-store signage and POP, generally you're working with people that are responsible for marketing budgets. And the people that are responsible for things like permanent signage and divisional graphics, that often comes from facilities, and which means you're dealing with contractors and architects. And within a lot of organizations, especially large brand organizations, those are two groups that generally don't talk to each other. And in terms of the sales cycle, it's a different skill set. So I think to sit back and say, okay, I got a team of sales guys out there and, they're selling POP to print buyers, to ask them to go and knock on doors and try and get these divisional graphics. It's a quantum shift. It's actually a much bigger shift in the sales process than it is in the manufacturing process. For the organizations that like we have that do a bit of both, even those reps that were out selling what we would call industrial decor, which would be the wallpaper, wall coverings, window graphics, even that pivot point to be able to go into, let's say, a restaurant or a retailer and compete cost effectively to produce things like divisional graphics. I think in the early days of the pandemic, it was a race to get in, and because of some of the pricing that we saw on things like acrylic, where we had huge spikes, but once that pricing began to settle down, it commoditized pretty darn quickly. Do I think it's a sustainable market? Absolutely, but I think it is a very specific laneway for sales within any organization.
Peter's going to laugh, but I'm going to agree with him on the money side. And because I think in the beginning, it was panic buying, right? You could say that you're going to print 1,000 of something and people weren't going to question the price. It was like trying to find toilet paper, right? Everyone needed a shield. Everyone needed a mask. Everyone needed that. So now the continuation of that is going to be, how well are you managing your cost of manufacturing to meet now, as Peter said, the commoditized pricing of those items. So I think those who were doing it probably caught a lot of wind and made a lot of change for their pocket. But I bet you a lot of them will not continue in that space because they don't have the manufacturing set up to keep the costs at a low dime. And if there's 1,000 printers that were doing it in Canada, there's probably only going to be 150 who are going to do it and still make strong money. And the others will have it as an offering on their website, but really won't ship anything. So I think to Peter's point, it became that the fastest commoditized product line in printing history for any of us right now.
Yeah, and also the reality is as well, you are potentially competing against an unprinted product that's sitting in somebody's warehouse. So you could have a generic office supplier that would have a standard screens sitting there waiting to go, and they're not printed, and you know what, they're $19, and am I going to open a docket and run a job for $19? So I think the secret to success there is, if you can establish a relationship with a general contractor, an architect, to be able to get your product being spec'd as they do the quote. And then as they begin to roll out buildings or commercial office space or potentially even restaurant builds, then you can get some sort of repetitive business and some traction.
Yeah, those are some great points. And to Jason's point too, about how almost all the printers would jump onto any capability to produce the demand. The ones that I think will continue to do so post-pandemic would be the ones that were the most automated with the steps, because in the beginning, everyone was doing it regardless of how many manual steps were in play and things like that, just to be able to offer something. But yeah, I think it's very important.
I'll tell you, every Zund and every Kongsberg rep in the world had a very good extended vacation cash flow coming to them because everyone needed cutting and so it was a very unique time. But I think it did bubble for us. So.
Okay, another question I have here, and I'd like to as well remind our attendees to please feel free to submit questions, and I will, as mentioned, either pose them to the panel as a whole or a specific panelist if you'd so like. Are there certain substrate limitations that are still in play that are limiting some areas of entering this production model fully in transitioning from traditional print methods to the production inkjet? And I know they're constantly evolving with new substrates and things like this to do so, but are there certain ones that really stand out?
Thomas and I are not going to honestly answer that question as manufacturers when we're both on the same call.
Yeah, they're going to say everything. They'll give you
Everything
everything
prints.
perfectly.
No, I think that's a fair question. And I think the industrial side really expands all of our steps of due diligence and research. People bring in a lot of different things that they wouldn't have brought a year ago. And I think we've all gone through the exercise of finding where the weak points and the strong points are. And, from the manufacturer side, it's our responsibility to be as transparent as possible through those steps. And, we've all found something. I'm sure Thomas has got a short list of things that he has a star next to that he's a little bit more cautious about. And, some metals, some anodized materials and stuff like that, we all pay attention to, or requirements as an example in flooring, whether you're doing LTV or PVC or water-based, whatever you're doing, the additional steps that's required to make those things adhere it to the flooring application that's being applied. So, there's a lot of things that we have to pay attention to for sure. But that is
And I
my,
think,
everything prints is my real answer. Everything prints. That's for Peter.
yeah, that's always good. That's always good, right? we say that, and it's it's pretty much true. But I think one of the things that people are paying more attention to, and rightfully so, is the ink technology. So there's certain things that still UV is great for, and then there's some new emerging UV technologies out there. There's latex technology, there's other water-based technologies, but really when it comes to this myriad of substrates that we've typically never seen before, everything turns into be a little bit of a science project. And what we're seeing not only is the challenge to print on some of the things that Jason talked about, like the metals and some of the more exotic plastics, fluorine, things like that, but we're really seeing the durability requirement being stretched. No pun intended, but what we're doing is we're seeing the demand for solutions that far encompass the printing process, that go into a post finishing process. Part of it is the digital finishing and the cutter manufacturers and everything like that, and the routing. But the other part of it is coatings. And it's quite interesting because not only are you going to have coatings that protect, against abrasion and solar, sun and things like that, but now we're getting into silver ion technology. We're getting into antimicrobial, for example, because we still have that mindset going forward. And we're seeing a lot of demand for that. So in industrial printing, when people are looking at, automobile parts, aftermarket parts, consumer products, even PPE, coatings are becoming more relevant. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, which is maybe getting away a little bit from the substrates because we feel we can conquer those challenges. But once we decide on an ink technology, to take it a little bit further.
And I think that's where, to add to Thomas's before Peter jumps in, you can see where a lot of manufacturers are starting to get into the ink and coating game. Some of us have been in it a lot longer than others, like HP and ourselves, but that is very true. It's the step post printing that becomes the science project.
Yeah. In terms of material handling, corrugate's easily the biggest curveball. Just in terms of, it's easy to lay down ink on corrugate, but there's good corrugate and there's bad corrugate. And then when your customer wants to ship you corrugate and it's in the middle of the winter with low humidity and it comes in like a banana, it doesn't matter what kind of printing device you have, handling that corrugate can be a real challenge. So that's easily the most difficult substrate to manage the supply chain on. And, in the end, you get what you pay for. I guess in terms of the printability, like a lot of printers, you may not have dedicated purpose-built print equipment and ink technology. So hijacking an ink and printer that you're using the device for running POP and in-store signage all day to be able to start to print on things like acrylic or metal, can end up being a disappointment. And we really got to think those things through. And the ink sets aren't, it's not like plug and play. You change them. You got to get enough volume to say, do I actually want to buy a dedicated device or not? And I think that trend is going to accelerate. And as it accelerates, and as you get purpose-built equipment and ink sets that provide higher levels of productivity, it becomes more difficult to compete. So I go back to the thing I've been saying all along: pick your laneway, stick within it, so you can be wide and shallow or narrow and deep.
That's very good. Yeah.
That's a great analogy. Actually, that kind of sort of bridges in partly has already been answered by this one question here, but I'll go right to you, Peter. So maybe you could even expand on what you were saying is, because you're more involved directly with this, how much capital, storage capacity should be set aside for even just maintaining adequate stocks of substrates for the large format? Because I think a lot of printers may not even necessarily think of that in terms of not only the capital acquisition cost, but also the capital acquisition cost of maintaining a substrate supply, which is extremely stretched recently with the demands for some certain high demand substrates.
Yeah, again, it depends upon how wide your product offering is. But considering in today's market that the job is often due before the customer's even called you, your ability to run the business successfully, to say, oh, I'm only going to buy the product after I got the order, you're just not going to compete. So you got to have your core products on the floor in enough depth that you can be able to, start printing within minutes, if not a couple hours of receiving the order. You can't wait for the truck to arrive. So that requires a fair bit of space. And, if we just say the average sheet is, 4 by 8 feet or 50 by 100, and I got 10 different stocks on the floor, it's a bit of a challenge. Roll to roll is a little bit easier because it doesn't consume quite as much space, but the flat stock game, it does require a big footprint, and it requires a fair bit of working capital to be able to float all that inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases right now, it's a game. Sorry, Stephen.
Go ahead. Sorry,
it's a game of chess in some cases too. So as Peter's been commenting a lot on corrugate, with the amount of things that are being shipped today, which are greater than we've ever seen, the supply chain has changed as well too. So you create a risk. So if you have a job that only requires 500 sheets of, let's say, 32B Chemi C1S, the risk of not being able to get more than those 500 become very high. So do you carry 1,000 on your floor now? Do you carry 1,500? And then you realize, okay, I'm not going to print for 2 months. Now it's all dry. It's such a risk thing now. And I think, to not to highlight them, but because they are a good sponsor of the DIA, I think how groups like Spicers and others have been able to manage the turn or work with end users to manage the amount of inventory that can flow between their larger facilities than the printers' facilities has helped a lot. And, even from the manufacturer's point, we rely on them sometimes as well to help us manage inventory. And I think it had to become a full circle process, right? We all had to sort of look at our own environments and then look at how others could help us. And sometimes it's a little sensitive reaching out that helping hand, right? Yeah. And, as Peter knows, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. So
I think, just to maybe put a little bit more math context behind it, I think that to be responsive, even with great suppliers like Spicers who can deliver virtually daily, in order to respond, if you've got a pretty broad product offering, your commitment to inventory could be as much as 10% of your sales. So forget about cash flowing your AR and your employees, but in terms of that material supply, as much as 10% of your annual sales could be tied up in inventory.
Wow.
And that's a lot of capital out, right?
A lot of capital.
Yeah.
Especially if your customers are paying in 90 and 120, but you're paying your supply chain in 30 to 45, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sunk cost. Sorry, Thomas, do you want to expand at all on any of that? Or?
No, I think we pretty much nailed that one. You know, supply chain is a challenge, but I mean, we're seeing two things. The first thing is the partner relationship has never been more important than it is now, because everyone has to be in lockstep towards those logistics and those challenges. And then the second thing is, you know, we've seen a lot of secondary and tertiary, you know, plan B and plan C, so to speak. So, you know, alternate materials and things like that, because really, I mean, there's some people in pretty bad shape to try and get supplies. So we've seen a lot of divergence in that regard.
That's a great point. Another question sort of based on sort of, challenges like shipping challenges, but also have you seen examples where even printers are struggling almost with internally in terms of supporting their logistics departments in terms of the volume of substrates coming in, the volume of orders going out? Because sometimes that's almost overlooked in some operations. And when the volumes were coming in at such capacity, do you see examples of that where people were really stretched in that department?
How about just shipping sucks in general right now? Doesn't matter what the what area you're looking at. So anyways, I'll let Peter, because that impacts them a little bit differently.
It's a great question. You know, you know, you're with shipping, you're dependent upon your carriers, your local carriers, and your national carriers. And I think there's been a great amount of disruption. You know, there was a time, you know, I think it was the second week of December, and we had a whole bunch of projects in transit, and FedEx comes along with the statement and says, we're not guaranteeing any of our service times. So now all of a sudden, something that was shipped on a 2 or a 3 day, and they're making no guarantees that it will be arriving there in 2 weeks. And now Christmas is gone, and the customer calls you up and says, I'm not paying. So this is not the first time that this has happened. And there's been a greater set of challenges with respect to, you know, lost shipments. And I think that whole chain of managing logistics is becoming a greater challenge, because it just seems like more goods are in transit for more individual destinations than, you know, any time ever in the past. And you know, everybody wants it now. You know, click a button and I you know, need it immediately. I just want to go back and make some reference to that 10% comment I mentioned previously. I was thinking 10% of your print revenue, not including, let's say, the finishing, kitting, and distribution. So if you looked at your P&L and you just said, I did X amount in print only, you know, a fair number for managing your cash flow for your inventory can be between 5 or 10% of that. But again, it's just dependent upon how broad is the product offering.
And then certain substrates we could experience sudden rapid increases in price too, which would throw off that model as well too.
Yep.
Well, pricing is everywhere, Stephen. Pricing is everywhere. There's no consistency on media pricing or sheet pricing right now. But you know, on the shipping, I think it's impacted all of us, even on the manufacturing side. You know, someone doesn't know how to drive a boat properly through the Suez Canal, kind of stuff, or you know, FedEx, to Peter's point, has changed their strategy, their pickup times. And you know, I know one of our sales team is on the line. Charbel would go, Jay, I know you live 10 minutes from our Milton warehouse. We can't get couriers or drivers. Can you load up your car with ink just to deliver, right? So, you know, it's impacted, whether it's what I would call, you know, the short delivery cycle, which is, you know, to Peter's point, the local courier, but even the worldwide international, it's been a change. And I honestly, I think if you don't have an Amazon logo on your box, you're not first in line by any means.
Yeah.
I know even from my own experience, obviously distributing other manufacturers' equipment, I've had POs go in where they've been delayed just because they're missing 1 or 2 parts to complete a massive system, but they're experiencing that supply chain delay on their end. Therefore, it's impacting us and impacting our customers. So, yeah.
Well, and it's how other areas of the world also were impacted by COVID. You know, like we have one of our facilities that's in Italy. Well, Italy was hit the hardest and the fastest, right? So, when they shut down and then they took holidays, right, as typical European holidays. So, there's so many variables now, and it's, you definitely have to give yourself a little bit more time. There's no true statement of we'll get there in 1 to 2 weeks. We have to be very honest that 1 to 2 weeks can today be 6 to 8, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, even something as as seemingly simple as skids, and skid costs have skyrocketed. The availability of wood, and even some of the vendors who ship in materials. It used to be not spicers, but some of the other vendors, they would provide inbound transportation included as long as you bought a certain amount. Now transportation's extra, and said, "Oh, and by the way, we're coming to pick up our skids." Like the whole world on the logistics side is flipping upside down.
Excellent. Okay. Another question we have here is, this may be more so for Thomas and Jason, but definitely you as a user as well, Peter. How fast do you see technology shifting and moving within these industrial inkjet devices? I know in previous it was print heads resolution, which was a massive, almost exponential growth in terms of the size of the drop that could be done, and the resolution evolved. Do you see it more so now being in terms of inks, which was mentioned a little earlier, for substrates that are compatible with inks, or what are kind of the big or the most significant technological advancements that are coming down the pipe?
Well, I think, if it's okay, to kind of go first on this
Absolutely.
one, I think that, it reinforces my comment before about ink technology. I think that drives a lot of what people do, and it's centric to their application breadth that they're going to offer. So, the whole object here is for print service providers to do what I had said earlier. There's two things: service customers that you have today, and do that well, and try to sell them new things that they don't have. I mean, because we believe that critical to success is developing more applications and then piggybacking on that more customers. So the ink technology eliminates the gaps that you have in offering those applications. So if you have an ink technology that works on the multitude of substrates that we've talked about today, then you are more mobile. You have more options. It not only is relevant to the offering that you have, but even backwards compatible to some of the logistics discussion we just had, because now you're creating agility on the substrate side. You are now bringing in other types of coatings and other types of manufacturing processes that you might have not ever been able to print on before, and now you can. So you're giving yourself options on the back end, and then you're opening it up on the front end.
So I'll agree with Thomas. So even for us, ink is first. Ink is by far our number one priority in any advancement or look at new market space. So ink quality, yield, speed, application, all those things. But if you're not paying attention to the chemical side of it, you're basically chasing tail. I think we probably have more projects in our time simulators to see the effect of inks now than anything, and whether it's water-based or our water-based program or our UV program. So I think you'll find that that's a common statement for us, and will be for a long time to come.
Perfect. Another question we have here is, what do you see as sort of the typical life cycle now of some of these large format industrial pieces of equipment? I know obviously that there's significant capital investment, but some people I know, when they start building and expanding that whole business segment or kind of like alternate business model within their company, sometimes it can be very quick to meet with demand. But is there sort of is it a 5-year, sort of 10-year life cycle? I just appreciate some feedback on that.
I'll take a stab at that. We always try to do our amortization and write down the financing, in the range of 40 months. I think if you take a longer view, it puts pressure on the bottom line, but to take a longer view of it means that you can often handcuff yourself if there's an opportunity to pivot and upgrade or change your technology. And nothing's worse than when you change out technology and you can't retire the debt and you have to add the debt onto the new piece of equipment. I mean, it's a vicious cycle, and provided you can get the funding, the banks don't mind it, but it's just not good business. So I mean, the way I'd seen it, and been doing this, for 20 years, and probably over that period of time had, a dozen different pieces of large format equipment. That's really the goal is, you target 36 months. It's a little bit aggressive. 40 months is probably good. On the long side, 48 months. Now, that doesn't mean you have to make a decision, but it means you have the flexibility to make a decision. And the great news is if you've written it down over that period of time and you're not replacing it, then it's just a little more cash to the bottom line.
Yeah, I think I think that that's a good number. And, but I think there's a couple other factors that you need to weigh into it. Because you can stretch that a little bit too, depending on the technology. Some technology is going to expire faster than others, and that's going to be, it could be fluids, it could be print heads, it could be material handling, whatever it is. But the other thing to look at is that addressable market. What is your total addressable market? We call it a TAM. It's what we do at HP. We acronym everything. Okay. So, but we look at the TAM numbers and we say, what is the length of that addressable market? How relevant will we be for how long with the technology that we've aligned ourselves to? So that's number one. And then as that addressable market will eventually shrink, what does the slope of that profit erosion look like? So how fast or how long can we keep it going for as good as it's going? So the 40 month is a good thing here, but again, major technology shifts don't happen as quickly as probably they used to. We have customers that have used machines for many, many, many years, longer than we thought they would, but then they're the ones that are stretching it. We have other people that are mobilizing with things that are quicker, but because they're betting on those addressable markets being captive for a shorter period of time.
I think there's a lot of right answers that you can throw out here. And I think to Thomas's point, when you start talking about industrial level technology, the lifespan is very different than the consumable, the swap out technology that's available. So for me, and especially for our team, it's about the business plan of the customer first, and then the return to that, right? So, if you analyze the scope of what the customer is trying to achieve in the market they're going after, for me, the lifespan of the engine or the technology that we're using is my second focus. My first focus is, I'm going to go back to Peter's, knowing your lane, staying in your lane, whether you swim in the shallow or the deep end. So I think if you analyze all of those things, then the determination on what technology drives that responsible business strategy, and then the lifespan to it. Because to Thomas's point, there's presses out there that have been running for 7 years that could still probably run for a few more years because they've stayed in the lane that they're meant to be in. So I think there's a lot of different answers. It just depends on their approach. I think the number one thing of all of it is whatever gets you making money the fastest.
Yeah, and I think Jay makes a great point. And then, within the context of, let's say, an industrial application where some of the equipment is considerably more expensive, it may not be feasible to do it over 36 or 40 months. And I know it's an old story, but one of the challenges for commercial printers that have been in the litho space for a long time, you have presses out there that, can be 15, 20 years old. Same with die cutting equipment. So, I think everybody's understanding that with a piece of technology that is digitally driven, which has a high degree of evolution on the technology front, that time period has to be quite a bit shorter. So, you know, I'm glad Jay brought that up, because I think the most important thing is understanding your laneway and your marketplace. And I guess, you know, kind of a layer on top of that is just providing yourself the opportunity to be able to pivot. You know, you don't know when a pandemic is going to hit. You don't know when there's going to be a market shift. And you don't want to put yourself in a position that you can't take advantage of something because you either don't have the borrowing power or you have some equipment that still has a lot of time to write off the remaining debt.
And this is the printing industry. There isn't a sure thing. None
Never.
of us have a sure thing.
So just print everything.
It's tough to say no, right? It's tough to say no.
The only constant is change.
It is. Listen, I don't care if it's offset web, small format digital, large format. The variables are all the same. You know, we all have customers that can go left or right in a heartbeat or a snap of a finger. The technology can change, the requirement can change. It's, you know, I think that's why we all love printing the way that we do. You know, whether those of us who have been in it a long time or those who are just jumping into it, it's constant change. There isn't a day that's the same, right? You know, there isn't a day that's the same. And I think that's why we do what we do, or sit in parking lots in the state of Texas, you know, doing webinars and so forth, or at our homes. This is what we're committed to. And I think that's important.
I actually find it's energizing, because if it was the same all the time, almost the propensity would be almost getting a little stagnant, whereas the constant change through technology, through applications, through substrates, everything, it's exciting.
Absolutely.
Perfect. I'll just have one more question. I'll open it as well to our attendees if they have any to ask. What markets do you see as having the greatest potential for growth using large format industrial inkjet that have not yet fully realized it?
Well, I think we've touched on so many of them already.
If it wasn't a limitation, perhaps maybe of inks or available substrates or something, could you see? Because even, yeah, getting into printed circuit breaker boards, obviously stuff like that, but you can get into
electrical printing, but I think the automotive side is still something that you know, still needs to explode. I think for the change in the short run packaging and folding carton and all those are still yet to explode. You know, again, variable content, variable messaging. I think, listen, everything in the end is not going to be driven by us. We're not Apple. You know, we can't all sit in our boardrooms. Although I will tell you, Peter and I have sat in sushi bars going, what could we develop to make customers buy from us, and instead of them telling us what they need. But I think really the change in what's going to drive new market is the expansion of the mindset of our customers, and we all see it changing. You know, social media has that impact. You know, how people are buying has that impact. You know, a lot more online buying. You know, even for myself, I've been on the road for 6 weeks. I've had the same amount of Amazon boxes follow me to hotels and my home down here than I have when I was in Toronto. So, you know, I think the brands and the buyers are really going to determine what our next direction is in printing. And, you know, someday, you know, someone's going to call Thomas or myself and say, you know what, I'm going to print carpeting now. You know, it's just going to be something strange and unique, or those who are doing leather, or, you know, ceramic tiles, or, you know, it's just people are going to get an idea that has been brought to them by their brand or their customer. And it's going to be that small idea where someone like Peter is going to go, okay, it worked for them, but I guarantee you I have 1,000 other people where I could do it too. Mm-hmm. And it'll be a push off. And I know it's kind of a ramble answer, but I really think that's really what's going to drive it.
I think Jay had a great comment about the mindset of the marketplace. And within that, it's all about timing. You know, so if we go back nearly 20 years, well, probably 18 years, and if you were to talk to a screen printer about a large format flatbed, which at that time you were lucky to get 8 boards an hour out of, and you know, they would look at you and they would say, it's never going to work. There's going to be blood on the floor. And, now it's 20 or 18 years later, and the market was disrupted by this technology. So, that's where I think there's a lot of mileage to go in the direct to corrugate business, because I think you've got that mindset there with the brown box guys and saying, no, it'll never work, because they're looking for long runs. They're looking to keep things the way they are, but the customer base is changing. So, we've heard it over and over again. Run lengths are shorter, variable content's becoming more. Equipment may or may not quite be there for it to be easy to do, but if it was easy to do, everybody would do it. And you know what, for a lot of us, we may not have $3-4 million to invest in some 100-foot long direct to corrugate printer. So how can we be innovative and use some of the existing equipment to test the waters and get into that market? And in the beginning, you nip away, and then at some point in time, the tipping point happens, and those that have not made the change or embraced the change, they fall pretty quickly. So I definitely think that there are a lot of markets outside of corrugate that have yet to experience that. Jay referenced the automotive market. I think there's a whole bunch of printed products, even within some of the 3D printing, which we haven't touched on today. It's not exactly large format, but at some point in time, that thing's going to pick up speed and potentially impact some of the things that we do now, where we would print on flat sheets and form them. Maybe it's going to be an all-in-one process that we could be potentially threatened by. So anyway, I think there's a lot of mileage to go on converting traditional printing processes in the industrial market to a large format print technology.
Perfect. Thomas, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I know. I was just watching the clock here, so I don't want to put anybody under any pressure today. But I think one of the, I think Jane and Peter both covered it pretty well. But one of the areas that we're seeing is, a lot of these metals are being replaced with plastics, and the need to decorate the plastics is increasing. You still have to apply a lot of rules to that about what Peter said earlier about staying in the lane. Things are different every day. That's a very accurate statement. But that is an exciting thing to look at. But again, there's a million ideas out there, and just aligning yourselves with the right environment is really the challenge.
Fantastic. I'd like to invite, if any of you three gentlemen would have anything to say kind of as a closing statement. I think we're going to begin to wrap at this point. I think Peter had the quote of the day: you can either be wide and shallow or narrow and deep, but pick your lane. I thought that was very well said.
Yeah, I think he was practicing that one. That came out so smooth.
That's what I say. That the best thing about TI Group is wide and shallow.
Fantastic. Well, yes, at this point, I'd like to definitely thank our panelists today for dedicating the time, Thomas, Jason, and Peter. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank our platinum sponsors of the DIA today. Our platinum sponsors, of course, again, are Canon, EFI, HP, Konica Minolta, and Spicers, as well as our gold sponsors, which are Adobe, Fujifilm, Graphics Canada, and Heidelberg. I'd also like to thank HP providing the technology today. We hope you found today educational and fun, and I do definitely appreciate our panel's generous contribution of their valuable time and the knowledge for today. On behalf of the panel, we're going to be making a donation on their behalf to the Don Gain Print Scholarship Fund today.
Awesome.
And just as a little reminder, our next webinar will be Wednesday, May the 19th, 2021, and we'll be featuring an update on the commercial wide format market. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you to all of our attendees and our guests. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Y'all be safe.
Cheers. Bye.
Awesome.
We just have to close the room. Remember, we still have 11 participants. So,